My name is Skylar, 31 years old, the youngest daughter of Mr. Gerald. 6 years ago, my mother passed away after a long illness, leaving a void nothing could ever fill. At the time, I was living in Seattle working as a communications manager for a tech corporation, earning enough to take care of myself and build a stable future. My small apartment overlooking Lake Union was my own world, waking up to sunlight reflecting off the water in the morning, ending the evening with a glass of wine and jazz music. But one phone call shattered it all. It was Ethan, my 41-year-old brother, his voice urgent but cold. "Dad's in bad shape. He forgets to eat, the house is a mess. Someone needs to live with him and take care of him." It sounded more like an order than a request. Ethan is the type who loves to flaunt his achievements. Currently a chief financial officer for an investment firm, living in a mansion in the Portland suburbs with his wife, Vanessa, and their 2 prized children. He drives luxury cars, vacations in Europe every summer, and never misses a chance to remind me he's more successful. But visiting Dad more than twice a year? That's not on his priority list. My sister, Melissa, 39, lives in Denver with her husband and their 3 kids. She teaches at a private school, her schedule's so packed that every phone call to Dad is as brief as a formality. They both have the same excuse: too busy with their own families, their own lives. And me, single with no children, naturally became the only candidate for the responsibility. I planned to refuse. But when Ethan sent me a photo of Dad sitting alone in a dark living room, his shoulders frail and his eyes vacant, I knew I couldn't turn away. I took a 3-month leave, packed my clothes and drove over 1,500 miles to the 2-story wooden house in the suburbs of Boise, the home I grew up in. At first I thought I'd stay temporarily, help Dad recover, then return to Seattle. But the moment I saw his condition, that plan collapsed instantly. He walked slowly, back bent, his hands trembling as he held a glass of water. Some mornings he mixed up the time, thinking Mom was still in the kitchen making coffee. I knew this wasn't a drop-by-once-in-a-while situation anymore. I resigned from my job, ended my apartment lease and officially moved back. That decision also meant ending my 2-year relationship with Noah. He didn't want to leave Seattle, and he certainly didn't want a life tied down to caring for an elderly parent. He told me, "You're sacrificing your whole future for something hopeless." I stayed silent. Nothing is hopeless when it's my father. This 4-bedroom house was left to my mother by my maternal grandparents. Every corner holds memories. The smell of waffles she made in the mornings, the sound of Dad's hammer when he built our treehouse in the yard, the golden glow of Christmas lights when our whole family gathered. Now it was just me and him in those empty rooms. Ethan and Melissa made no effort to hide their irritation when they learned I planned to stay long-term. In short, clipped calls, they'd slip in lines like, "You're wasting your potential. Dad wouldn't want you to bury your life like this." But whenever I suggested they take turns caring for him, the answer was always, "Can't do it." I started setting a routine for Dad. Breakfast at 7 a.m., checking his blood pressure daily, 15 minutes of walking around the yard, and reading the news together in the afternoon. Some days he was sharp enough to tell stories from his youth as a civil engineer, but other days he'd sit in silence, eyes searching for someone long gone. Even when I was exhausted, I knew I was doing the right thing. Dad once told me, his voice raspy but firm, "If you weren't here, I don't know what I'd do." Those words were enough to make me forget every criticism, enough to keep me here, no matter the judgment in my siblings' eyes. Everything started to change last spring when my father, Mr. Gerald, met Clara during a routine checkup at the cardiology clinic. Clara, 52, was the nurse in charge of taking blood pressure and chatting with patients to help them relax. Dad told me he felt at ease around her because she knew how to listen and always smiled. Within just a few weeks, I saw her at our house more often, sometimes bringing baked goods, other times taking Dad to the park near Quinn Lake. At first, I thought it was a good thing. Dad had endured enough loneliness since Mom passed. I hoped he would find joy again, someone to keep him company. But only 3 months later, Clara and Dad announced they were getting married. The decision came so fast I barely had time to understand who she really was. They had a small ceremony at the local church. Ethan and Melissa immediately sent flowers and sweet congratulations, a stark contrast to their usual indifference. I remember clearly when Ethan called me after the wedding, his voice suddenly relieved. "Now Dad has someone to take care of him. You can think about getting back to your career." I dodged the question, but inside I had a strange feeling. Not jealousy, not disapproval of Dad's marriage, but because of the look in Clara's eyes that day. It wasn't the gaze of a woman in love. It was the look of someone assessing a possession she'd just acquired. In the first weeks after the wedding, Clara seemed very devoted. She cooked Dad's favorite meals, took him to regular health checkups, encouraged him to join the senior club at the community center. Dad's happiness was obvious, and that made me set aside my doubts for the moment. Over time, though, I began to notice odd things. Clara hardly cared about the keepsakes in the house. The wedding photos of my parents, the wooden clock my maternal grandparents had passed down, or the antique tea set my mom cherished all her life. Whenever I cleaned or arranged them, she would glance briefly, then switch the subject to things like rising property values in the neighborhood or renovations that could make the house look more modern. Once, while I was watering plants in the yard, I overheard Clara talking on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low but each word clear. Spacious lot for bedrooms, quiet neighborhood, market value at least $700,000. My footsteps made her stop abruptly, turning to smile as if the call had never happened. Ethan and Melissa started acting unusually friendly toward Clara. They called her more than they called Dad, and during their rare visits, they'd praise her for bringing new life to Dad. I didn't overlook that, especially since both avoided talking directly to me about the family's long-term plans. One evening, while I was folding blankets in the living room, Clara sat down beside me, her voice light as a breeze. "Skylar, how long have you been here now?" "Over a year, right?" I nodded. "Your dad and I could use some privacy. Maybe you should think about finding your own place." I looked up, my heart sinking. "Did Dad say that to you?" She smiled, not answering directly. "We'll talk about it later when your dad's feeling better." From that day I started paying closer attention. Clara often went into Dad's office when he was napping, rifling through drawers. Another time I saw her open the file cabinet in the living room and slip a thick envelope into her purse. When I asked, she claimed it was an insurance bill that needed paying. I didn't tell Dad right away. He was still in a phase of absolute trust in his new wife. But inside, my unease kept growing. I'd seen too many stories of elderly people being taken advantage of to ignore these signs. Everything became clear when I accidentally overheard a conversation between Ethan and Clara on the back porch. They were sitting close together with a stack of papers and printouts from a real estate listing site in front of them. Ethan said, "If we sell now, the price will peak. Dad will get the best care and we can divide everyone's share." Clara laughed and replied, "The important thing is to get Skylar out first." I stepped back into the shadows, my heart pounding. At that moment I knew for certain, they didn't just want privacy or upgrades for Dad. They were aiming straight for this house, the place holding all my family's memories, my mother's legacy. And I was the only obstacle in their way. I didn't let them know I'd heard. From that moment I began quietly preparing. I gathered every document on property ownership, my mother's will and Dad's medical records. I knew that if I didn't act soon, the day would come when I'd be forced out of the very home I'd been protecting. Just a few weeks after the night I eavesdropped on their porch conversation, my suspicions began to take clearer shape. Ethan suddenly started visiting more often, but almost never when my father was home. Usually Mr. Gerald would be at physical therapy or napping in his recliner, while Ethan and Clara sat at the dining table, heads close together with a spread of papers in front of them. One afternoon while I was gardening out back, their soft laughter drifted from the kitchen door. I tiptoed closer and peeked through the doorway. On the table were full-color printouts, not of our house, but of the interiors of luxury high-rise condos downtown. I also caught sight of the heading on another stack of papers, "Property Appraisal, Maple Street." That was our address. When I walked in, they both flinched. Clara quickly gathered the papers into a neat stack, her tone airy. "We were just looking at some interior design ideas. Ethan thinks your dad could renovate the kitchen." I looked straight into her eyes, trying to keep my voice steady. Strange, because I just saw the title "Property Appraisal" on the table. Ethan gave a short laugh and put his arm around Clara. "You're too suspicious, Skylar. In finance, looking at real estate values is perfectly normal." The answer was smooth, but the way they rushed to cover those papers sent a chill down my spine. From that day on, I paid closer attention. Once, I heard a strange noise in my father's office. When I walked in, I caught Clara rifling through the file cabinet. She forced a weak smile. Your dad asked me to find his health insurance records. I glanced down at the open drawer. It was filled with property deeds, savings account books, and a leather-bound folder of legal documents. Clearly, there wasn't a single insurance form in sight. Another morning, while Dad was asleep, the doorbell rang. A man in a suit carrying a leather briefcase introduced himself as Mark, Ethan's investment advisor. He brought a thick stack of documents, glanced at me warily, then turned to Clara. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" I didn't leave. Clara's face tightened, but she reluctantly sat in the living room. When they opened the file, their conversation was filled with terms about transactions, transfers, and deposit contracts. My father had no idea. He believed Clara and Ethan were helping him organize paperwork, so it would be easier to manage later. He still smiled warmly when telling me Ethan cared about his future, that Clara was a devoted wife. I didn't want to shatter that peace too soon, but I knew if I stayed silent they would act before long. I started looking for ways to get information. Once, Clara left her purse on the armchair while she stepped outside to take a call. I noticed a thick envelope in the outer pocket, with the logo of a major real estate company. I quickly snapped a photo with my phone. Broker proposal, quick sale, cash payment preferred. I also noticed Ethan and Clara often met on Thursday mornings, the exact day my father had rehab at the medical center. They'd sit in the kitchen with the door shut and curtains drawn. I pressed my ear against the laundry room wall right next to the kitchen and heard things like, "The power of attorney needs to be done before the contract signing. We have to make him believe this place is bad for his health. Skylar is the only obstacle." Those words made me tremble with both fear and anger. They weren't just plotting to take the house. They were aiming to push me out of my father's life entirely. I told my Uncle Wayne, Dad's younger brother who lives in Spokane. He listened silently, then sighed. "Your father has given both his heart and his trust to this woman. If you want to protect him, you'll need solid proof and strong legal backing." He promised to contact an old family lawyer for advice. From then on, I began documenting everything. Recording events, saving every image, message, and piece of paperwork related to Clara and Ethan. I knew time was running out. The eager look in Clara's eyes whenever she talked about a new house, and Ethan's constant push for a more suitable place for Dad, were signs they were ready to strike. I began to notice my father's health changing in a strange way. In the past, even at his age, Mr. Gerald was still sharp and quick in conversation. But in just the past few months, his memory had declined alarmingly. Some days he would ask me the same question 3 times within 10 minutes. Some days he forgot the breakfast he had just eaten, or confused my name with my mother's. At first I thought it was a sign of aging or stress. But then I realized a troubling pattern. The days he seemed the most groggy were always the days Clara personally prepared his evening tea or his bedtime medication. One evening, while washing dishes, I saw an unlabeled bottle with a dark red cap on the kitchen shelf. I had never seen it before. When I asked, Clara smiled faintly. "Just giving your father some extra multivitamins, dear, to help him sleep better." I picked up the bottle and shook it lightly. Inside were ivory-colored capsules, completely different from regular vitamins. I asked for the name of the medicine and she just shrugged. "Got it from a supplement store. Nothing serious." The explanation sounded harmless, but a deep unease grew inside me. I took one capsule to Maya, my friend who worked as a pharmacist in town. The next day she called back, her voice heavy with seriousness. "Skylar, this isn't a vitamin. It's a strong sedative, usually only used in hospitals, and it requires a doctor's prescription." I froze. Why would Clara give this to my father? The answer was all too clear: to make him sleepy, confused, and easier to manipulate. I decided to watch more closely. The next night I pretended to go out shopping but came back early and stood on the back porch looking through the kitchen window. Clara was opening a drawer, taking out the unlabeled bottle and pouring some into a glass of orange juice. She stirred it thoroughly, then carried the glass into my father's room. I recorded everything on my phone. The next day while Clara was out, I checked my father's pillbox. Some of the original tablets had been removed and replaced with others of a similar color. It was so subtle that if I hadn't been familiar with his medication, I never would have noticed. I told Uncle Wayne everything. He was silent for a long moment, then said, "This is dangerous behavior. You need an independent doctor to check your father's condition when he hasn't taken those pills." That's the only way to prove the harm. Following his advice, I arranged for my father to see Dr. Foster, a respected geriatric specialist in Spokane, without letting Clara know in advance. I chose a day when my father hadn't taken Clara's vitamins for 2 consecutive days. The results made me both relieved and furious. His memory and reflexes were perfectly normal with only mild age-related decline, nothing like the grogginess I'd seen at home. Foster took careful notes and advised me to keep this information confidential until I had gathered enough evidence. I agreed and continued leaving small cameras in the kitchen, living room, and hallway leading to my father's bedroom. Within just 1 week, I recorded Clara secretly putting drugs in his drinks 3 times and swapping his pills twice. But the worst happened on a weekend evening. After drinking the glass of milk Clara gave him, my father began to lose his balance as he stepped into the living room. I caught him just before he hit the table. When I looked back, Clara was standing behind him, her face showing no panic, only a brief frown as if her plan had just been interrupted. "Let me take him upstairs," she said evenly. "No," I replied, tightening my grip on my father's shoulder. "I'll take care of him tonight." Clara stared at me for a few seconds, then walked away, her footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. That night, I sat beside my father's bed, watching him sleep, his breathing steady but unusually deep. I knew I couldn't delay any longer. Ethan and Clara were moving fast, and the drugs were only part of their plan. If I didn't act soon, everything would spiral out of control, and my father could lose both his mind and his home. I picked up my phone, called Uncle Wayne, and said briefly, "We need to act now. I have the evidence and I won't let them take another step forward." I had spent nearly a month preparing for my father Gerald's 70th birthday. I wanted it to be a beautiful day that would help him forget the dark schemes I had quietly been tracking all this time. From his favorite Texas-style barbecue to a 3-tier vanilla buttercream cake just like Mom used to make, I prepared everything myself. I even printed dozens of family photos and arranged them into a memory wall right in the living room so he could see he was still loved and cherished. That morning I helped Dad downstairs. He wore the pale blue shirt I'd just bought him, his hair neatly combed, his eyes holding a light I hadn't seen in a long time. "You're so thoughtful, Skylar," he said, his voice trembling slightly but warm. Guests began arriving. Melissa and her husband came first but didn't bring the 3 kids I'd hoped to see. They greeted Dad briefly, then quickly headed to the drinks table, whispering to Ethan, who had just walked in with his wife Vanessa, carrying a small gift bag. Not long after, Clara appeared in a bright red dress, bold lipstick, hugging Dad tightly as if she were the star of the party. I kept my composure, greeting guests, pouring drinks, and chatting with Dad's old friends, the only ones bringing any warmth into the room. But I couldn't ignore how Ethan and Clara kept exchanging glances, or how a gray-haired man in a neat suit sat in the corner with a briefcase in hand. Clara gave a vague introduction. "This is Mr. Randall, a friend of the family." After the meal, I brought out the cake, lit the candles, and led everyone in singing, "Happy Birthday." Dad smiled, his eyes shimmering with emotion. I thought maybe, at least for tonight, nothing bad would happen. I was wrong. As soon as Dad blew out the candles, Ethan stood up, glass of wine in hand, tapping it to get attention. His voice was clear and confident. "Today, besides celebrating Dad's birthday, we also have an important announcement." My stomach tightened. Clara sat next to Dad, placing her hand on his shoulder like a claim of ownership. Ethan went on. "After much thought and with Dad's consent, I've taken over legal representation for him. We've decided this house no longer suits his health or needs. He'll be moving to a luxury care facility with 24/7 medical staff. The house will be sold this month." Murmurs rippled through the room. I looked at Dad, his face confused, eyebrows furrowed as if he didn't fully understand. I heard him mumble, "But what about my study and the garden?" Clara quickly cut in, her voice syrupy and fake. "Oh, sweetheart, they have a beautiful garden there. Skylar and everyone can visit anytime." Ethan pulled out a stack of papers from a briefcase, placing them on the table in the center of the room. "Everything is ready. This is the contract with the real estate office. All we need is a signature." I froze. I knew they had been scheming, but I hadn't expected them to make a move in public, on his birthday. They chose this moment because they knew he'd be flustered in front of a crowd and less likely to resist, framing it as a family decision. I stepped forward, keeping my voice calm. Ethan, I don't recall Dad ever saying he wanted to leave this house. He gave a mocking smile. Skylar, you're too attached to these four walls. This is for Dad's benefit, not to satisfy your stubbornness. I glanced at Melissa, hoping for support, but she just looked down, avoiding my gaze. Randall, the stranger, had opened his case, pulled out a pen and pointed to the signature line. Dad turned to me, his voice faint. Skylar, do you really think I shouldn't go? I took his hand, squeezing it firmly. Dad, this is your home. No one can decide for you while you're still of sound mind. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. Dad's not as clear-headed as you think. That's why he gave me power of attorney. All the documents are legal. The air in the room turned heavy. Dad's friends looked at each other awkwardly. Clara smiled in quiet triumph, her hand gripping his shoulder to keep him in place. I knew that if the night went according to their script, by tomorrow morning this house would no longer be his. And I knew I hadn't come here empty-handed. In my bag was a folder and a USB drive, months' worth of gathered evidence. But I couldn't act too soon. The timing had to be perfect, with everyone present and unable to deny the truth. I looked directly at Ethan, then at Clara, and said slowly, if you truly believe all this is for Dad's benefit, then you won't mind if we invite a few people to confirm that right here and now. Both of them hesitated. I stepped out onto the back porch and dialed Jonathan, my lawyer and a close friend since college. He used to be a prosecutor before opening his own practice specializing in elder law. Jonathan's voice was deep and steady. Skylar, stay calm. Everything you've given me over the past few months is enough to shut this down on the spot. Wayne and I are nearby. We'll be there in 10 minutes. I nodded, ended the call, and took a deep breath. In my handbag, I had all the evidence ready. A video of Clara secretly slipping something into my father's drink, a copy of the lab results from Dr. Foster, photos of text messages between Clara and Ethan, and the new power of attorney my father had signed on a day when he was completely lucid, naming both me and Uncle Wayne as joint decision-makers for all matters related to his health and property. When I returned to the living room, the air was still tense. Ethan was going on about the quality of care at the nursing facility, while Clara poured more wine for my father, urging him to drink. I stepped forward and placed my hand over the glass. Dad doesn't need to drink this right now. Clara gave me a forced smile, but there was a flash of irritation in her eyes. The doorbell rang. I went to open it. Jonathan walked in, followed by Uncle Wayne, moving a bit slowly from his bad knee but wearing a determined expression. All the guests turned to look. Ethan frowned. What's going on here? Jonathan calmly took off his coat, revealing a thick file. Just a few legal matters we need to clarify before anyone signs anything. I stood beside him, pulled a USB drive from my bag and plugged it into the living room TV. The screen lit up with clear footage. Clara opening a drawer, taking out an unmarked bottle of pills and dropping them into my father's orange juice. Another clip showed her swapping out pills in his daily medication box. Murmurs spread through my father's friends. Clara shot to her feet, her voice sharp. This is an invasion of privacy. Jonathan replied immediately. Under Idaho law, a homeowner has the right to install recording devices in common areas when there's reasonable suspicion of illegal activity. And this evidence will be sent directly to the police. Ethan jumped in, trying to keep his composure. This is just a misunderstanding. Dad isn't mentally competent. He needs supervision and Uncle Wayne cut him off, his voice firm. Competent? Your father just signed a new power of attorney for Skylar and me, fully lucid, in front of both a lawyer and a doctor. That document voids every prior authority you had. Jonathan opened the file and pulled out the new power of attorney for everyone to see. My father stared at the paper, then looked up, his eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. That's right. I felt good that day and my mind was sharp. I want Skylar and Wayne to help me, not Ethan. Ethan's patience snapped. He slammed his hand on the table. This is a setup. She's manipulating you. I kept my voice steady, but each word was like a blade. If you believe that, then explain the text messages between you and Clara 3 years before she even met Dad. Perfect target. The daughter lives with him but can be dealt with. Those are your exact words. I held up my phone so everyone could see the screen. Melissa exhaled sharply and covered her mouth. My father's friends looked at Ethan and Clara with open disgust. Jonathan took a step forward. We also have copies of Mr. Gerald's blood test results, showing abnormally high levels of sedatives not prescribed to him. That explains the sudden swings in his memory, and those levels match the exact time frame when Clara moved in. Clara's face went pale as she collapsed into her seat. Ethan muttered something about being concerned for Dad's health, but no one was listening anymore. Uncle Wayne stepped up, resting a hand on his brother's shoulder. Gerald, from now on, Skylar and I will hold all the paperwork for the house. No one will pressure you into signing anything. Dad nodded, then turned to me. Thank you for not ignoring the things that didn't feel right. The room fell into heavy silence. Ethan looked around and realized he had no allies left. Clara folded her arms, staring at the floor, her lips pressed tight. Jonathan gathered every contract Ethan and Mr. Randall had brought, tore each one in half, and put them in his briefcase. These no longer have any legal standing. And if anyone attempts any unauthorized transaction involving this property, we'll take it straight to court. The screech of a chair echoed as Mr. Randall, the real estate agent, stood. I want nothing to do with this. Excuse me. He hurried out of the house. I watched him leave, feeling both relieved and on edge. I knew this battle wasn't over yet. Clara sat in silence for a long moment, her hands twisting together. The confident, haughty look she always carried was gone. When Jonathan produced a copy of the bank transaction showing a $40,000 transfer from my father's account to Ethan's, her eyes flickered, and then unexpectedly she let out a bitter laugh. Fine. You all want the truth? I'll give it to you. She turned to my father, her voice sharp. Gerald, I never married you for love. Ethan approached me first, promised me a cut of the house sale. My job was to make you dependent and get you to sign whatever papers he needed. The entire room froze. Melissa's mouth fell open and my father's friends exchanged horrified glances. Ethan's face went pale as he whipped around toward Clara. Are you insane? Who told you to say that? Claire shrugged. I have nothing left to lose. You promised me a big payout, but it looks like you're going down with me. My father sat still, his hands trembling slightly, but his voice was clearer than it had been in weeks. Clara, pack your things and leave this house immediately. She shot to her feet, her tone dripping venom. You think I want to stay? This old place is miserable. I'll call my lawyer, and when I do... Jonathan cut her off. Your marriage will be annulled on grounds of fraud and elder abuse. If you want to go to court, we'll be ready, with full evidence of you drugging Mr. Gerald and participating in a conspiracy to steal his assets. Clara's face darkened. She marched upstairs, and the sound of drawers slamming and luggage dragging across hardwood echoed through the house. Minutes later, she came down with 2 suitcases, throwing me a hateful glare before storming out. The door slammed shut, leaving behind a heavy silence. Ethan now stood alone in the living room, no one left to shield him. Jonathan placed a stack of printed bank statements in front of him. This is proof you withdrew $40,000 from Mr. Gerald's account under the label of financial management fees, transferred directly into your private company. That's 4 times the standard rate with no legitimate service contract. Ethan's jaw tightened. I did it to manage Dad's money. Uncle Wayne shook his head. Manage? Or embezzle? You'll be explaining that to the authorities. Melissa's voice trembled as she looked at her brother. Ethan, you lied to me. You said Dad agreed to move, that everything was legal. Ethan avoided her gaze, muttering something no one could hear. Jonathan's tone was cold as steel. I've already filed a motion for a full financial investigation and an immediate freeze on your access to Mr. Gerald's accounts. The court will sign the order this week. My father leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment before opening them to fix on Ethan. From now on, you have no say in my property or my health. I need time to decide whether I can ever forgive you. Ethan took a deep breath, grabbed his coat and headed for the door. But before leaving, he turned back to me, his voice low and bitter. This isn't over, Skylar. I met his gaze evenly. No. It'll be over when the truth is in front of a judge. When the door closed behind him, my father took my hand. Daughter, thank you. I've been blind for too long. I squeezed his hand gently. You're still here, and so is the house. We won't let anyone take it again. The remaining guests quietly excused themselves, leaving only me, Dad, Melissa, Uncle Wayne, and Jonathan. No one spoke much, but we all understood. We'd won a battle, not the war. Ethan was still out there, and a man like him wouldn't go down easily. Jonathan gathered the documents and gave me one last instruction. Keep all the evidence somewhere safe. And be ready, they might try to smear you or hit back legally. We'll stay one step ahead. That night, as I cleaned up the remains of the birthday table, my eyes drifted to the photo wall I'd carefully arranged. My mother's gaze in her wedding portrait seemed to meet mine, gentle yet unwavering. I knew I had just protected her legacy one more time. But deep down I also knew the real storm was still ahead. 3 weeks after Clara and Ethan left the house, the atmosphere began to shift. My father, Gerald, was noticeably recovering. Without the sedatives secretly slipped into his drinks, his memory grew sharper each day. He recalled old stories, even recounting in detail his years as a bridge construction engineer in Montana, memories once clouded by fabricated confusion. Each morning I made him a cup of strong black coffee just the way he liked it, no sugar. We sat on the front porch watching sunlight spill through the maple trees. For the first time in months I saw him smile naturally without strain. He even started doing light chores in the yard, fixing the fence, clearing leaves, proving to himself he could still take care of things. Melissa changed too. After the shock of what Ethan and Clara had done, she began visiting more often, sometimes bringing her husband and kids to stay for a couple of days. The once quiet kitchen was now filled with children's laughter and my father chuckling over checkers. The distance between us was closing. One evening, while we were preparing dinner, she set the knife down and softly said, "Skylar, you did what all of us should have done. You protected Dad, protected the house. I know I trusted the wrong people, and I'm sorry." I looked at her, saw the sincerity in her eyes, and simply nodded. What matters is you're here now. Uncle Wayne still came by every weekend, bringing old family items from the storage unit in Spokane, saying he was returning them to their rightful place. Each object came with a story: Grandpa's pocket watch, Mom's carefully kept photo albums. The house was slowly filling with memories, not just ours but those of generations before us. Jonathan, though busy, still stopped in to update us on the legal process. The investigation into Ethan continued, with solid evidence of the $40,000 embezzlement. Clara had left the state, but the no-contact order with my father remained in place. Jonathan advised keeping all legal protections active in case of unexpected trouble. My father started re-engaging with the community. One morning he asked me to take him to the senior center to see old friends. I waited at a nearby cafe, watching him through the window as he gestured animatedly, eyes bright, laughing like he used to. That's when I knew I had truly pulled him back from the brink of losing his independence. The house itself hadn't changed, same cream walls, same faint scent of aged wood, but the feeling inside was different. No more fear at unfamiliar footsteps, no more watchful eyes plotting to take what wasn't theirs. Instead, there was laughter, the sound of chopping vegetables, and the soft wind drifting in through the open evening windows. One weekend night, as we all sat in the living room, my father suddenly said, "This house has seen it all, our happiest days and our hardest ones. And I know it will keep our good memories as long as we protect it together." Melissa squeezed his hand. I nodded silently. Later, alone in the hallway, I looked at the photos on the wall. Mom smiling in her wedding dress, Dad young in his work overalls, Melissa and me on the porch steps with a young Ethan. Some memories can't be erased no matter who tries. And some things, like family bonds in this home, are worth fighting for until the very end. I knew challenges still lay ahead. But I also knew I wasn't alone. My father was strong again, Melissa had found her place beside me, and Uncle Wayne remained our steady anchor. This house wasn't just property, it was our heritage, the heart of our family. And now it was surrounded by people who truly loved one another. Skylar's story shows the power of love and steadfastness in protecting loved ones and a family legacy. From standing alone against a scheme to seize assets and abuse her father, she bravely gathered evidence, exposed the liar in public, and restored her father's autonomy. Now her father is recovering, her sister has returned to the family, and the house is preserved as a symbol of memory and love. In real life, staying firm in the face of injustice can save not only property but also relationships and trust. What do you think about how Skylar protected her father and their home from relatives' schemes? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to follow the channel to catch the next heartfelt family stories.